I never thought that watching someone die would be the reason I started to truly live. I've been an ICU nurse for 7 years. 7 years of beeping monitors, antiseptic smells, and the heavy, suffocating silence that fills a room when a doctor calls time of death. You get hardened to it. You have to. If I cried for every patient I lost, I wouldn't be able to do my job. I built a wall around my heart. I was a professional. I was efficient. And honestly, I was spiritually dead. I grew up in a religious household. We went to church every Sunday. We said grace before meals. But to me, God was just an idea, a cultural habit. He was someone we visited on weekends but ignored during the week. As I saw more suffering in the hospital, that vague belief turned into cynicism. How could a loving God allow this? Why do good people suffer? I didn't have answers, and eventually I stopped asking. I just existed. Work, sleep, repeat. Then came the night shift that changed everything. It was 2 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The ward was quiet except for the rhythmic whooshing of ventilators. I was assigned to room 304. The patient was a young woman named Amira. She was only in her 30s, terminal cancer. It had spread everywhere. Medically speaking, she should have been in agonizing pain, screaming, or at least heavily sedated into unconsciousness. But when I walked in to check her vitals, she was awake. Her eyes were tired, sunken, but there was something in them that startled me. They were clear, calm. There was no panic, no fear. In 7 years, I have seen grown men beg for their lives. I have seen families tear their clothes in grief. I have seen terror in the eyes of the dying. But Amira looked like she was just waiting for a train. Her husband was sitting by her bedside. He wasn't crying hysterically. He was holding her hand, reciting something in a low, melodic rhythm. It wasn't English. It sounded like a hum, a vibration that seemed to settle the very air in the room. I checked the monitor. Her heart rate was dropping. Her blood pressure was bottoming out. She was leaving us. I need to call the doctor, I said, my voice purely clinical. The husband looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, full of sadness, but also that same strange, unnerving peace. He nodded gently. Do what you must, nurse, but please, stay calm. She can hear us. I stopped. Stay calm? His wife was dying. Why wasn't he screaming at me to do something? Why wasn't he demanding a miracle? I watched them. Amira turned her head slightly toward him. She whispered something I couldn't understand. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, La ilaha illa Allah. She smiled. I don't mean a polite smile. I mean a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to ignore the tubes, the pain, and the cancer eating her body. She raised her right index finger, pointed it weakly toward the ceiling, took one last breath, and then she was gone. The monitor flatlined. The long, continuous beep cut through the room. Usually, this is when chaos erupts. This is when the wailing starts. But the husband just closed his eyes. He lowered his head and said in a broken but steady voice, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. I stood there, frozen. I felt a chill run down my spine, not of fear, but of shock. I had just witnessed death, the thing I feared most in the world, the thing that gave me nightmares, and it looked beautiful. How? How is that possible? I went to the break room afterwards and sat in the dark. My hands were shaking. I poured myself coffee, but I couldn't drink it. I kept seeing her smile. I kept seeing that finger pointing up. What did she know that I didn't? What did she have that I was missing? I went home that morning, but I couldn't sleep. I felt haunted, not by a ghost, but by a question. Where did she go? And why was she so sure she was going there? I opened my laptop. I didn't even know what to search for. I typed in, what do Muslims say before they die? The results came up. The Shahada, the testimony of faith. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. I read about the concept of the soul returning to its creator. I read that for a believer, death is not the end, but a transition, a waking up from a dream. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to say, oh, it's just a coping mechanism. Poor people, they need a crutch. But I couldn't lie to myself. I had seen plenty of religious people die, Christians, Jews, atheists. I had never seen that specific kind of peace. I started digging deeper. I bought a translation of the Quran. I told myself it was just intellectual curiosity. I was just researching cultures for my job. I started reading. And I was angry. I was angry because it wasn't what I expected. I expected a book of angry rules, of violence, of oppression, everything the news had told me. Instead, I found verses that spoke directly to the emptiness in my chest. Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. 13:28. I read that verse and I burst into tears. I was alone in my apartment, crying over a book I was supposed to hate. My heart wasn't resting. My heart was a storm. I was anxious all the time. I was terrified of the future. And here was this book promising the one thing I couldn't buy with my nursing salary: peace. But I fought it. I fought it hard. I can't be Muslim, I told myself. I'm a white girl from the suburbs. I like my freedom. I don't want to cover my hair. I don't want to change my name. I focused on the superficial things because the theological truth was too heavy to handle. The biggest hurdle was Jesus. I loved Jesus, or at least the idea of him. Giving him up felt like a betrayal. But then I read the chapter in the Quran named Maryam, Mary. I read how the Quran honors Jesus, how it defends his mother's purity, how it describes him as a mighty messenger, a miracle worker, a word from God, but not God himself. It was like a lightning bolt struck my brain. All my life, the Trinity had confused me. I never understood how God could be a man, how God could die, how God could pray to himself in the Garden of Gethsemane. I just swallowed it because I was told to. Suddenly, Islam was offering me a Jesus I could actually understand. A Jesus who was powerful, holy, and human. A Jesus who fell on his face to worship the Creator, just like Amira's husband did. It made too much sense, and that terrified me, because if it's true, then I have to change. Months passed. I was living a double life. By day, I was the cynical nurse. By night, I was watching YouTube lectures, listening to the Adhan on my phone with headphones so my neighbors wouldn't hear. One night, I hit my breaking point. It was just a random Tuesday, nothing special. I was overwhelmed with a feeling of unworthiness. I felt dirty, not physically, but spiritually. I felt like I was carrying a mountain of sins and wasted years. I locked my bedroom door. I didn't know how to pray properly. I didn't have a prayer mat. I just put a clean towel on the floor. I stood there, feeling like an idiot. What are you doing? My brain screamed. You're crazy. But my heart screamed louder. Just try. I got down on my knees. I put my forehead on the floor. And the moment my forehead touched that towel, the dam broke. I sobbed. I sobbed so hard my ribs hurt. It wasn't just crying, it was a release. It was 30 years of ego, 30 years of I can do it myself, 30 years of loneliness pouring out of me. In that position, completely humbled, lower than I had ever been, I felt higher than I had ever felt. I felt heard. For the first time in my life, I wasn't talking to a ceiling. I was talking to him. I didn't see a light. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt a presence, a heaviness that was also a comfort. I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't alone in that room. I stayed there for 20 minutes. When I finally sat up, the room looked different. The world looked different. The anxiety that had been tightening my chest for years, it was gone, just gone. I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend I didn't know. The next day, I didn't go to work. I went to the local mosque. I had driven past it 1,000 times and never looked at it. Now I was walking up the steps, my heart pounding in my throat. I found a woman in the office. She looked at me, blue jeans, messy bun, looking terrified, and she smiled. It was the same warmth I saw in Amira's eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. I think I need to say the words," I stammered. She didn't ask which words. She knew. She took my hand. Her hand was warm. I repeated after her. My Arabic was clumsy. I stumbled, but I meant every syllable. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. It's been 2 years since that day. My family didn't understand. My mom cried and asked why I was rejecting my heritage. My friends at the hospital thought I was going through a phase or having a mental breakdown. "You're too smart for that," they said. But they don't see what I see. They don't see that I didn't lose my freedom. I found it. I was a slave to society's expectations, a slave to my own anxiety, a slave to the fear of death. Now, I submit only to the one who created death and life. I still work in the ICU. I still see people die. It still hurts. But now when I see a patient take their last breath, I don't feel despair. I make a silent prayer for them. And sometimes when it's quiet, I think of Amira, the woman whose death gave me life. I never got to thank her. But inshallah, one day I will meet her again. And I'll tell her that her final smile was the compass that guided me home. My name is Sarah, and I am a Muslim. And for the first time in my life, I am truly alive.